whisper of the ocean spoke to him louder than any city street ever could. He wasn't the kind of person to live behind walls or settle into routine. His spirit craved adventure. Hiking boots and climbing ropes were as natural to him as breathing. By his early 30s, Warren had built a life that revolved around exploration. Weekends weren't for resting, they were for journeys into the untamed corners of Australia, where the land stretched wild and unpredictable. His friends admired his courage, sometimes even thought him reckless, but Warren knew something they didn't. When you push your limits in nature, you also discover your limits within yourself. Climbing became his greatest passion. The challenge of gripping onto rock faces, feeling the wind whip across his skin, and reaching summits that few dared to attempt filled him with purpose. He felt most alive on the edge of danger, where every decision mattered, every step demanded focus. To Warren, mountains weren't just physical obstacles, they were metaphors for life. Each climb represented the belief that no matter how steep the path, perseverance could take you higher. At this stage in his life, Warren had no idea that one climb would change everything. He didn't know that the mountains he loved so fiercely would one day test him beyond anything he could imagine. But adventure is like that, it doesn't just reveal the world to you. It reveals who you really are. In April of 1997, Warren Macdonald set out for what seemed like another thrilling climb. His destination was Hinchinbrook Island, off the coast of Queensland, Australia. Known for its rugged cliffs, lush rainforest, and remote beauty, the island was a place that demanded respect. For Warren, it was the perfect challenge. Accompanied by a fellow hiker, Geert van Keulen, he was eager to test himself against the raw, untamed wilderness once more. The climb started well, humid air, sticky ground beneath their boots, the steady rhythm of steps and breaths carrying them upward. But adventure is unpredictable, and danger often waits without warning. As they ascended through the steep and slippery terrain, disaster struck. A massive boulder, loosened by rain, suddenly broke free from the mountainside. In an instant, the rock shifted and crashed down with unrelenting force. Warren had no time to react. The boulder crushed him against the ground, pinning him by the lower body. The weight was unimaginable, pressing down with tons of force, trapping him in a vice of stone. Shock coursed through his system, followed by searing pain that tore through every nerve. He was alive, but immobile. For hours, he and Geert struggled desperately. They tried moving the rock, tried finding leverage, but nothing worked. The reality settled in like a cold fog. Warren was stuck, and the wilderness offered no mercy. Night fell, and with it came rain, darkness, and the chilling awareness that he might not survive until morning. Pinned beneath the crushing weight, Warren's mind spun between fear and determination. He thought of his life, his dreams, and his deep love for adventure. In those agonizing hours, he understood something profound. Life could change forever in a single heartbeat. What he didn't yet know was that this accident wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of a journey that would redefine the meaning of courage. The night stretched endlessly for Warren Macdonald. Pinned beneath the colossal boulder on Hinchinbrook Island, every minute felt like an eternity. His friend Geert stayed by his side, doing everything possible to keep him awake, warm, and hopeful. But the wilderness was merciless. Rain poured, insects buzzed relentlessly, and the darkness seemed to swallow all hope. As the hours turned into a full day, Warren's body began to fail. Pain radiated through his legs, and shock threatened to shut him down completely. Geert, realizing the gravity of the situation, made the most difficult decision. He would have to leave Warren behind to seek help. With courage and urgency, he trekked through the dense rainforest, fighting exhaustion, mud, and thick vegetation, determined to find rescuers before it was too late. For 2 long days, Warren lay trapped. His mind swung between despair and fierce determination. He imagined his family, his future, and the adventures he had yet to live. Every breath became a conscious choice, a refusal to surrender. By the time Geert finally returned with a rescue team, Warren's body was weak, but his spirit had not broken. The rescue was grueling. Helicopters roared above as rescuers struggled to free him from the crushing boulder. At last, after nearly 2.5 days of agony, Warren was airlifted out and rushed to the hospital. Relief washed over him, but it was only temporary. The doctors delivered devastating news. His legs had been so severely damaged that they could not be saved. In a matter of days, Warren went from an adventurous climber to a double amputee. The loss was staggering. When he awoke from surgery and looked down to see his legs gone, a wave of grief consumed him. Questions echoed in his mind. Would he ever climb again? Would his life still have meaning? Or had the accident destroyed everything he had worked for? For many, this would have been the end of their story, a tragic close to a promising life. But for Warren, even in his darkest moments, a quiet determination flickered. He had survived the impossible, and somewhere deep inside, he sensed that this survival came with a greater purpose. His journey was far from over. Waking up in the hospital without his legs was like waking into a nightmare Warren Macdonald couldn't escape. The room smelled of antiseptic, the steady beeping of machines surrounded him, and yet the most haunting sound was silence, the absence of footsteps he would never take again. 4 days, he drifted in and out of consciousness, caught between waves of pain and the crushing realization of what he had lost. The hospital staff spoke gently, but their words cut deeply. Rehabilitation, prosthetics, lifelong adjustments, terms that now defined his future. Warren's adventurous identity felt shattered. He wasn't just grieving his legs, he was grieving the man he had been, the life he thought he'd live. Friends visited with hopeful words, but inside, Warren wrestled with despair. How can I climb mountains without legs? How can I live fully when half of me is gone? Yet, even in the darkness, small sparks of resilience began to emerge. Each day, therapists encouraged him to move, to push his body in ways it resisted. At first, the simplest tasks felt impossible, sitting up, maneuvering a wheelchair, learning to balance again. Every movement was a battle, but each victory, no matter how small, whispered that perhaps he was not as broken as he felt. Warren began to journal, writing out his pain, his fears, and his hopes. In the process, he discovered something profound. Losing his legs had not taken away his spirit. The fire that once drove him to climb remained, buried but alive. He started to think not of what he had lost, but of what he still could do. This shift in mindset became his anchor. Slowly, he learned to use prosthetic limbs. The first steps were awkward and painful, but with persistence, he regained mobility. More importantly, he regained purpose. Warren realized that while his body had changed forever, his passion for adventure did not have to die. The struggle to rebuild was brutal, physically, emotionally, and mentally, but it was in this crucible of suffering that Warren began forging a new identity. He was no longer just a climber. He was becoming a survivor, a fighter, and soon, an inspiration for others. Months had passed since the accident, and Warren Macdonald had learned to walk with prosthetics. Yet, walking was never the goal that burned brightest in his heart. Deep down, he longed for something bigger, the mountains. Most people saw this dream as impossible, even reckless. How could a double amputee climb again? But Warren knew that if he didn't try, the part of him that had survived the boulder would slowly die. With fierce determination, he began planning his return to climbing. His eyes fell on Cradle Mountain in Tasmania, a peak known for its jagged cliffs and unforgiving terrain. For many, it was a challenge even with 2 strong legs. For Warren, it would be proof to the world and to himself that he was still a climber. Training was grueling. He experimented with specialized equipment, adapting climbing gear to fit his prosthetics and upper body strength. Every pull-up, every push, every stretch of muscle was fueled by the vision of standing on that summit. Fear lingered, but courage roared louder. Finally, the day arrived. The mountain loomed before him, wrapped in mist and mystery. Each movement upward was an ordeal. Warren relied heavily on his arms, dragging his body up rock after rock, his prosthetics scraping against stone. Sweat drenched his face, his muscles trembled, but he refused to stop. With each meter gained, he felt his spirit rising higher than the mountain itself. The climb stretched for hours, testing every ounce of strength he had left. But as he neared the top, something shifted inside him. This was no longer just about reaching a summit, it was about reclaiming his life. When Warren finally pulled himself onto the peak, tears filled his eyes. The view stretched endlessly, but what mattered most was what he had proven, that resilience could conquer despair, that determination could outclimb tragedy. He stood, not on prosthetics, but on the foundation of his unbreakable will. That climb marked more than a victory, it was a rebirth. Warren Macdonald was no longer the man crushed by a boulder. He was the man who rose above it. Conquering Cradle Mountain had changed Warren Macdonald's life. It was more than a climb, it was a declaration that his story was far from over. But for Warren, one summit was never enough. The fire that burned within him now pushed him toward even greater challenges. He realized that the accident had not ended his journey as a mountaineer, it had merely redefined what was possible. Word of his achievement spread, inspiring people across Australia and beyond. Yet instead of basking in the praise, Warren set his eyes on bigger, tougher goals. He began studying some of the world's most demanding peaks, mountains that even able-bodied climbers feared. His dream was not only to test himself but also to show the world that human limits are often illusions. In 1999, just 2 years after losing his legs, Warren set his sights on Kilimanjaro in Africa, the tallest freestanding mountain in the world. Standing at nearly 6,000 meters, it was a formidable challenge. Preparation consumed him. He trained relentlessly, strengthening his arms, chest, and back, because those muscles would carry him more than his prosthetics. Custom-made climbing gear was designed to fit his body, allowing him to crawl, pull, and hoist himself up the steep terrain. The climb was brutal. Harsh winds whipped across his face, cold bit into his skin, and oxygen grew scarce with every step upward. Progress was agonizingly slow, sometimes just a few meters an hour. But Warren refused to surrender. Each painful movement reminded him of the moment he thought he would die beneath that boulder, and each pull forward was proof that he had not survived just to live quietly. After days of struggle, Warren stood on the summit of Kilimanjaro. The sight was breathtaking, clouds spread below like an endless ocean, the horizon kissed by the rising sun. But the most powerful view was inward. Warren saw himself not as broken, but as whole, forged stronger by suffering. This victory didn't just belong to him, it belonged to anyone who had ever been told they couldn't, anyone who had been crushed by life but still chose to rise. Warren Macdonald had climbed higher mountains, and now, he carried the world with him. After conquering Kilimanjaro, Warren Macdonald's life took on a new purpose. The mountains had given him back his strength, but now he realized his story could give strength to others. What he had endured, the accident, the loss, the painful rebuilding, and the impossible climbs, was not just his journey. It was a message of resilience for anyone facing struggles of their own. He began to write, putting his experiences into words that carried both raw honesty and hope. His memoir, A Test of Will, became more than a book, it became a guide for people battling their own boulders, whether physical, emotional, or mental. Readers around the world connected to his story, not because they were climbers, but because they understood hardship. Warren's survival and determination became a mirror for their own possibilities. Soon, he was invited to speak at conferences, schools, and events. Standing before audiences, Warren did more than tell his tale, he lived it. With humor, vulnerability, and passion, he reminded people that obstacles do not define us, our response to them does. Listeners left his talks inspired to face their own challenges with courage. Television networks and documentaries began sharing his story, amplifying his voice. Warren wasn't seeking fame, he was building a bridge of hope, showing that when life takes away something we think we can't live without, it also offers a chance to discover strength we never knew we had. Through sharing his journey, Warren realized that his greatest climb wasn't up mountains of rock and ice. It was helping others rise above the mountains in their lives. She had faced storms before, but this one felt different. The weight of failure was still heavy on her shoulders, yet something inside had shifted. Instead of asking why me, she began to whisper, why not me? For the first time, she realized that every person she admired had once walked through the same darkness she was in. Helen Keller had overcome silence and blindness, Nick Vujicic had conquered life without limbs, and countless others had turned pain into purpose. If they could, why couldn't she? She started small. One page of a book, one paragraph of her journal, one deep breath when anxiety tried to take over. And each small step became proof that she was capable of more than her fear suggested. The world around her didn't change overnight, but her perspective did. She stopped waiting for someone else to hand her strength and discovered it was already inside her, hidden beneath doubt. When she stood before the mirror again, she no longer saw just a girl fighting battles. She saw a warrior in the making. Not because she had one, but because she had chosen to keep standing when giving up would have been easier. And in that quiet courage, she finally understood strength isn't about being unbroken, it's about refusing to stay shattered. The days that followed were not free of struggle. She still stumbled, still heard the whispers of doubt, still felt the sting of failure. But there was a difference now, she no longer mistook setbacks as the end of her journey. Instead, she treated them as lessons written in bold ink across the pages of her life. Each fall was not a sign of weakness, but proof that she had the courage to move forward. One evening, as she sat watching the sun dip below the horizon, she reflected on how far she had come. Once, the same setting sun would fill her heart with despair, a reminder of another day lost. But now, it whispered something new: tomorrow will rise again, and so will you. She realized that life was never about escaping storms, it was about learning to dance in the rain, to walk through the fire without letting it consume her spirit. She started sharing her story with others, first with trembling words, then with unshakable conviction. People listened, not because she was perfect, but because she was real. Her scars became her testimony, her tears became seeds of hope, and her survival became a lighthouse for those still drowning in darkness. She wasn't just living anymore, she was leading, inspiring, and proving that the most broken moments can birth the most unbreakable souls. The path she had walked was far from easy. It was filled with nights of tears, mornings of doubt, and seasons when she believed she had nothing left to give. But as she stood at the end of this chapter, she realized something extraordinary: every hardship, every scar, and every failure had not destroyed her. They had built her. They had carved strength into her soul, wisdom into her mind, and compassion into her heart. On the day she was invited to share her journey with others, she felt the weight of her past pressing against her chest. For a moment, the old voice of fear whispered, "You're not enough. You'll never be enough." But instead of shrinking, she smiled. She had heard that voice before, and she had learned how to answer it. Standing tall, she walked onto the stage, her heart no longer trembling but blazing with a fire only survivors carry. When she spoke, there was no pretense. She did not present herself as perfect, nor did she hide the messy truth of her journey. She spoke about the days when she nearly gave up, the nights she cried silently, and the mornings she forced herself to rise even when she had no strength left. She told them about failure, about fear, and about the beauty of choosing to fight one more day. And as she spoke, something incredible happened. The audience leaned in, tears glistening in their eyes, because they saw themselves in her words. Her story was not just hers anymore, it belonged to everyone who had ever felt broken, overlooked, or defeated. In her scars, they found hope. In her honesty, they found strength. In her resilience, they found proof that they too could rise. When the hall erupted in applause, she didn't feel pride in the way most might expect. She felt gratitude. Gratitude for the storms that once tried to drown her but instead taught her how to swim. Gratitude for the failures that pushed her down but forced her to grow wings. Gratitude for the pain that had once been unbearable but had turned into her greatest teacher. Later that evening, she sat alone beneath the stars, reflecting. The girl who once begged for a miracle had become the miracle for others. The girl who once waited for someone to save her had become a guide for countless souls. She no longer asked, "Why me?" Instead, she whispered, "Why not me?" Her legacy was not in wealth, trophies, or fame. Her legacy lived in every heart she had touched, every life she had inspired, every person who chose not to give up after hearing her story. She had proven that storms do not destroy us, they refine us. That true strength is not in never falling, but in rising every single time. And as she looked ahead to the unknown chapters of her life, she knew this truth: her journey would never truly end. Because courage, once ignited, is a fire that continues to burn not just within one person, but within all who dare to rise.